Leases. Let us now look at leases. We have already, in a way, understood lease when we what did we do? We did off-balance sheet financing. We had discussed an operating lease, but let us understand leases in its entirety. Now, what is a lease? A lease is a contract. It's a long-term contract between a lessor and a lessee. Now, who is a lessor? Lessor is the owner. You know what we say, the landlord, if for simpler terminology for you to remember. Lessor is who? The landlord, the person who owns the asset. So there is a contract. A lease is nothing but a contract between the owner and the user of the asset. So what does this contract do? The contract gives the right of usage of the asset. Clear? So lease is nothing but a long-term contract between the lessor and the lessee, giving the right to use the asset to the lessee, in exchange for which what does he give? He gives certain lease payments. He gives certain lease payments. Clear? Now, so remember who is the lessor? The owner. The lessee is the person, is the tenant, is the person who is using the asset, who is getting the asset to use it. That is the lessee. Okay. And lease payments are made. Great. What are the kinds of lease? This is the most important thing actually. Kinds of lease are finance lease or operating lease. Finance lease also called, in the US it's often called capital lease. The finance lease or capital lease. And on the other side you have the operating lease. Capital lease, operating lease. Okay. What is a finance lease? The lease to own an asset. The lease is designed in such a manner that at the end of the use of the asset, I am in effect, if I have leased the asset, I am in effect the owner of the asset. Ownership is transferred. So this whole contract is actually arranged in such a manner that I become an owner of the asset. The intention is to purchase the asset, but in an operating lease, that is not the aim. In an operating lease, it is purely on rental basis. I hire a computer for a couple of days. I hire an AC for a couple of days. That is the nature of a rental. Kinds of lease. So a lease is nothing but a contract between a owner and a user, a lessor and a lessee, right? Giving the lessor grants right of usage of an asset to the lessee in exchange for certain lease payments. Correct? And now we are saying that the leases are of two types, maybe a capital lease or an operating lease, where a capital lease is an intention to purchase the asset and operating lease is only to hire and use it for a short period of time. Now let us now understand the classification test, which is the most important thing when you understand leases. Classification test. How do you identify a finance lease? Any one of the following conditions needs to be satisfied for the lessee. So we are now talking from the point of view of the lessee. Any one of the following conditions needs to be satisfied. What is that? Transfer of ownership at the end of the lease. Ownership needs to be transferred, or the lease contains an option for a bargain purchase. What is a bargain purchase? There is an option, say after the end of 5 years, you can take the asset for $5 for a token value of $10 for $1. So basically there is no real purchase. This is an option for what is called a bargain purchase. It is in effect just transferring the ownership. So one of the following conditions, either ownership is transferred or there is an option for a bargain purchase. The lease term is 75% or more of the life of the asset. So if the life of the asset is 4 years, the lease term must at least be 3 years or above. At least 75%. And the present value, and no, all of these conditions are the present value of the lease payments is 90% or more of the fair value of the asset. present value of the lease payments is 90% or more of the fair value of the asset. So if any of these conditions is satisfied, the lessee, the person who is using the asset, must treat it as a finance lease and not an operating lease. Is it clear? What is it? Either just try to remember transfer of ownership. Don't look. Try to remember without looking. It's transfer of ownership at the end of the lease, or you get an option to purchase it at a very nominal value, at a very cheap price, right? The lease term must be 75% or more of the life of the asset. So basically you are using it for the entire life of the asset actually. That is the idea. Or the present value of the payments is 90% or more of the fair value of the asset. This is identifying a finance lease as far as the lessee is concerned. So is it different when a lessor is concerned? For a lessor, yes, the 4 conditions have to be satisfied. The same 4 conditions: transfer of ownership at the end of the lease, or an option to purchase the lease cheap. What was that? Bargain purchase offer. That's right. The lease term is 75% or more of the life of the asset, or the present value of the lease payments is 90% or more of the fair value of the asset. These 4 conditions. Then it is in the books of the lessee anyway, capital lease. But here, this is lessor. Lessor must have 2 more conditions. These are called revenue recognition. Requirement must be satisfied. There should be reasonable assurance of cash collection. There should be reasonable assurance of cash collection. Must be quite certain that the money will come in, and future costs are predictable. So basically we will hardly have to incur any future costs. If we do have to, we know exactly what is the amount. We are not going to suddenly get some huge amount of cost incurred by the lessee which we have to reimburse. Is it clear? So the same conditions, but plus there should be reasonable assurance of cash collection, and future costs which the lessor may have to bear must be more or less predictable. There will be either no future costs, or the little future costs that would be there are predictable normal costs. Only then in the books of the lessor it may be a finance lease. It does not necessarily mean that both the lessee and the lessor have to treat it as a finance lease. Clear?